What a game to start off the year. KCD was certainly a unique experience that is unlike anything that I've played before. Looking back now that I've completed everything in this game, there's a lot of unique charm and frustration that does come with KCD's design choice, so let's get into it. Since this is a new year, the structure of lookbacks are still the same. I'll talk a bit about my experiences with the story, then characters, and finally close off with the functions in the game. KCD's story, functionally, first of all, is the main form of content and how new content gets unlocked. What I mean by this is that side quests and activities rely on how far the player has got into the main story. And since questing is pretty much the primary offering in this game, it made the world feel lived in, as side quests typically revolved or referenced the current events of the main quest. Now as for the story, I found it quite short and leaving me with a lot of anticipation for what's next. The game felt like an opening act instead of the main course, as nobody really dies, and in the end the Lords of Bohemia and Henry aren't really better off than they were when the game began. That being said, a lot of lore, tension, and allegiances are established, and I believe if the devs are going for a tell style for this game and show style for KCD 2, then there is definitely going to be a huge payoff for this structure of storytelling. I did enjoy how all the individual investigations linked together, the bandits at Neuhof and the counterfeit silver. It really shows just how vulnerable Bohemia is and how a mercenary alliance can pose such a threat to national authority. It actually reminds me a lot of RK from Lost Judgment, a bunch of street punks and ex-Yakuza that are being secretly led and funded by an opposing government authority. For the majority of this game though, Henry is typically acting as the investigator or messenger of some sort. I like this approach a lot because it demonstrates that Henry is not primarily a soldier, he's a commoner, and he proves to be a capable negotiator and mediator as the story progresses, and I enjoyed how this translated into gameplay in regards to quest progression. The open-ended nature of not just the main quest, but side quests as well are incredibly detailed and thorough. I'm still fascinated that I was able to skip the entire silver counterfeit investigation because I simply ran into Rapoda as he didn't look like he fit in. Also, the game gave his name away for free. Finally, I want to quickly talk about one of the game's themes that I appreciate, and that is the concept of honor. I liked how its depiction could be in the form of a provocation, but also of a genuine promise among conflicting parties. I didn't play this on camera, but the Band Bastards DLC demonstrated how honor can be taken advantage of in order to lure someone into a dangerous situation. If you're a person in a more powerful position than your opposition, then honor can be used against you to manipulate a more desirable response. Subsequently, as demonstrated in the main story, I really enjoyed Hanush and Toth's negotiation. They both have what each other want and can't trust each other, but honor in this context means more than just keeping your word. How I interpreted it is that if either of them didn't uphold their promise, then they lose respect in all future situations. Toth, for example, would be seen as untrustworthy, not just among the Lords of Bohemia, but also his allies like King Sigismund, which may be a fate worse than death in the 1400s. It was also a nice detail to have Hans and Henry totally disagree with this hostage exchange, as they don't have the same experiences as Robar, Divish, or Hanush. But that's all I have to say about the story. It was a great start, and Henry has a long to-do list for KCD 2. He's got to get his sword back, and get his vengeance on Markvart and Toth. Characters. There are many, with the same face assets. I still find it hilarious that Moorcock is the same person as Pius. I guess you could say he's doing some self-searching. Important characters, however, there aren't really many, which I appreciate. I felt like each character got a respectable amount of screen time, whether it was the Lords of Bohemia, the two captains, and of course, Hans himself, who has an entire DLC questline. The only missed opportunity I have is that they could have given closure to Divish by having him face off against Havel when they try to destroy the trebuchet. His men were already there, so unless they're saving Havel and Divish's conflict for KCD 2, they could have ended it there. Henry's growth in the story is very subtle, and he matures through his investigations, and I would also say through the open-ended decisions he makes in the story. He learns how to operate around nobility, opens up new opportunities by learning to read, and make better judgments instead of just jumping into situations without a plan. I also really enjoyed Hans and Henry's dynamic. Both of similar age but of different social classes, they're great foils of each other, and their interactions demonstrate that they're not so different. Henry is more serious, and Hans reminds him that it's okay to enjoy life and move on from the past, whereas Hans is more free-spirited, so Henry has to constantly remind him of his responsibilities. With KCD2 revolving around this duo, I have no doubts that the interactions are going to be amazing. And now it's time to talk about the actual game. I can sum it up in one sentence. If I'm not hungry, I'm tired. I also maybe have a broken bone, so I can't jump. Was at least the early game experience for me. KCD definitely felt more difficult in the early game, but much more manageable once I started unlocking perks and leveling stats. There was a lot to think about: nourishment, energy, durability, freshness, all which deplete by simply existing. It's a realistic game that presents its systems in the form of resource management, so before starting a quest, I always did a personal check like, do I have enough food and repair kits, and make sure I sleep nearby before starting. A modest amount of quests in this game are time sensitive the moment you start them, so you only have X amount of in-game days to complete them. Continuity wise, it makes sense, but it did suck going into some of them initially without knowing that, and then failing them after I put them off for some other task or waiting for half a day so I can read some skill books. Quests are also the focal piece of content in this game. KCD is an open world with exploration and side activities like poaching, alchemy, and crime, but unlike traditional open worlds that players may be familiar with, the game doesn't operate on completion metrics or ways of identifying if you completed an area. Instead, quests are the only direct form of completion. That being said, quests are not to be taken lightly. Every side quest typically has 3 or more ways to approach them, as well as different endings, dialogues, and rewards based on the decisions that Henry makes. They're very well crafted to even accommodate objectives that don't appear in your log, and may be inferred by the player, which can lead to interesting or hidden results. Speaking of interesting results, let's discuss criminal activity. It's Bethesda levels of comical, which is great. I didn't think I'd find a game that would be able to mimic the same level of Elder Scrolls comedy, but I finally found one. Getting away with crime in KCD is hard. You may get away with it temporarily, like killing a townsperson and hiding their body in a small room, but wait an hour and there is a high chance that a guard will find you and arrest you. Now, besides the temporary stat and reputation decrease in jail time, the consequences of crime aren't really that severe, which means the temptation of going on a dagger murder spree is high. Just make sure you have a savior schnapp handy. Finally, I guess I'll talk about combat. Actually, I'll be honest, I never really learned how to combat properly. In the end, I kind of treat it like the Trail series, it's just not for me, so I'm going to expedite the process as much as possible. That being said, I do enjoy the attempt at realistic swordplay. Now, combat does get pretty funky, especially if you swing and walk right into the enemy. There's like a high chance of just straight up phasing through the opponent, or you end up in like a clinch loop. But combat does feel more satisfying when it's a one-on-one, especially if you get those master strikes memorized. With that said, bows are quite useful, and I found myself using them a lot more than swords to take down enemy groups after stealth. And that's going to close off the first title of 2026. I'm glad I stuck to the main story for video purposes. While the side quests are equally compelling, some are more demanding in the requirements, such as being able to read or procure certain items and potions, which just simply wouldn't have been possible if I was playing organically. I got a good handle on KCD's type of content though, so for the sequel, which will probably happen next year, I will know how to operate around it and approach it. Until then though, I will see you tomorrow for our next adventure.